A lot of people coming in the front door right now, so see if they make their way in here. Did everybody have a good week? Anything exceptionally exciting? For me, this time of the year is just let me get up from my desk for a while. Highlight of my week was getting outside and mowing my field yesterday. You know, it's a good day to wear a teddy tie, and I got to thinking. I think we ought all, guys, maybe even some ladies, I don't know, we ought to go out and buy a teddy tie, and next year on Pastor Appreciation Day, we ought to all wear them. Don't you think that'd be a great idea? I see Scotty's already got one on. I just think that would be fun. Okay. Wanda said she'd wear one. Good. All right. Well, I see there's still a lot of socializing going on out there in the lobby, but we'll get started. The lesson this week is about covenant. It's a covenant primer. So I suspect that this lesson this week is going to kind of set the stage for the rest of the quarter. And I didn't look ahead too much, but I suspect that that's what it is. So we're gonna delve into the elements of what a covenant is today and kind of tie it into a story that I have to tell. And I am looking forward to lots of feedback, lots of answers to questions. Now, we're few in number, which means you're all going to have to talk a lot, okay? All right, so here's the story. In 1985, I was in partnership with another CPA, and we merged our firm with another CPA firm. And my partner, who merged in essence, sold that part of the practice and moved to the west side of the state, and I stayed on. It didn't take too long after we merged the firms together to realize that the space we were in wasn't big enough, so we started looking for new space, and that was right during the time when the Fernwell building downtown was being rehabbed from an old, dusty, basically empty building into a nice Class B office building. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Fernwell building. It sits on the corner of Riverside and Stevens. It's a nice building. And we found the whole top floor of the Fernwell building, and it was just perfect for us. And so we signed a lease and began the tenant improvements, which were beautiful. As a result of the merger, we had to form a new partnership agreement, a contract, if you will. And the two partners that owned the firm that we merged into, I'll refer to as Partner S and Partner M. They were the senior partners. They had a longtime employee that they wanted to bring into the partnership, and then there was me, who had merged my practice in. And so we've needed a new partnership agreement. And Partner M and Partner S had been together for 6, 7, 8 years. I don't remember exactly how much, but they had developed a good practice, and they developed an element of trust with each other. And Partner M said, I'll take the responsibility of the partnership agreement. And Partner S and I kind of took the responsibility of the tenant improvements for the new office space. It's kind of and the other guy was just busy working, as we all were. When the partnership agreement came back drafted, we all sat down together and reviewed it. And the senior partner, Partner S, said, well, this partnership agreement is okay as long as we view it like a marriage, a long-term marriage, because anything short of that would be very detrimental. And we all agreed. And this partnership agreement had things in it like ownership percentages, profit-sharing percentages, etc. You know how contracts look. Any of you have been in a partnership, if you had a partnership agreement, they can be lengthy and lots of words. It also had in it a buy-sell agreement. And the buy-sell was if someone came along, let's say a long-term employee came on and decided that, they'd been there long enough, had developed a practice big enough, they should become a partner in the firm, there was a buy-in clause, as well as if one of the partners decided that it was time to retire or leave, or something should happen to them, there was a sell agreement also, a buy-sell agreement. They're very common when you have joint ownership. And the sell agreement established a method of establishing the price of what that partner would be bought out for, retire at, or their estate would be paid in the event something happened to them. And that's what the senior partner was referring to as being very detrimental. The way the clause was set up, if something happened within a short period of time, it would be financially disastrous. We all went into it with the idea that it would be a long-term partnership, and as time went on and the partnership built in equity and growth, etc., then that buy-sell agreement became less onerous. And I remember Partner S saying, this is like a marriage, guys. We're going to have to trust each other because anything short of that would be extremely detrimental. And we all agreed. And we all shook hands, and we all signed the partnership agreement. And in December of 1986, moved into our brand new office space. And off we went with tax season, and everybody was excited, and the future was bright. So what's the difference between a contract and a covenant? Bill?
It seems to me that the difference is the word trust.
Okay.
And also I think that there's something else that's related to trust, and it's what I refer to as promise.
Promise, okay. Trust, promise, okay. Anybody else have any thoughts about the difference between, the primary difference between a covenant and a contract? Anybody? Okay, much more personal. Okay, I like that. And that goes right along with what Bill is saying, trust and promise. It's a personal, it's a relational contract. Okay? So, a contract can bind two or more parties together legally. Covenants bind two or more parties together. And in the context of the Old Testament and these covenants that we're studying this week, there was a very, very, very important distinction with a covenant. There were two parts to a covenant. One were the arrangements. And back into my story about our partnership agreement, those arrangements were ownership percentage, profit sharing percentage, buy-sell agreement and calculation as to how that would come about. Those were the arrangements. In a covenant, there's this other important thing: trust, promise, personal relationship. Relationship, and relationship based on trust. Okay? And so that was the huge thing. And these covenants in the Old Testament could have been a covenant between a man and a man, but the covenants that we're talking about is a covenant between God and man. And that's where the relationship aspect becomes so important. And we're going to find this out. So in this relational covenant, what's man's role? Anybody? Man's role in a covenant relationship is typically do something, and in this vernacular with God and man forming the covenant, God asks man to do something, and that's the arrangement. And God asks for obedience because, and we're going to study this here in a second with Noah, God says, do this, obey me. And what's God's role in a covenant? It's God's role in all of these covenants. There are specific arrangements that God says that he'll do. We'll see that in a minute too. But specifically, or generally, should I say, God's responsibility, God's arrangement in the covenant is, and this is a broad term, can be used in many ways, salvation. That's God's role in the covenant. Okay? So, what are the two things in a covenant? Relationship and arrangements. Jim?
Yes, I was thinking about the covenant with Noah. And Noah had to build the ark, didn't he?
Right.
And he got on the ark. He had to get in it. There were a lot of people, apparently, that helped him, carpenters, but they didn't get in it.
Right.
Furthermore, there's a statement in Patriarchs and Prophets that has intrigued me for years. The ark would not have saved Noah except for the providential, miraculous work of God. Ultimately, Noah did what God asked him, but it was God who saved.
There you go.
The flood was so terrible that even Satan shuddered and feared for his own existence.
There you go.
So in the final analysis, it's God's promise
Right.
and power that
Right.
saves us, but we have a part.
Absolutely. And you used the word save, which is also a derivative of salvation. So, okay. Would you do me a favor, Jim, and turn to Genesis 6:18 through 21 and just hold it there. We'll get to it in a minute. So let me get back to my story real quick. Because ultimately this ties into the end, I think. So we moved into our new office space on the 6th floor of the Fernwell building. Beautiful space. My office looked right out. I could look right across to the spiral driveway coming out of the parkade. And I'd just sit there. If I was on the phone, I'd turn around and watch cars come wee, 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 all the way down that spiral. It was fun. And the offices were beautiful. I mean, they really were beautiful. We had about 5,000 square feet, and it was stunning. It was beautiful. And we were all excited. Partners came in at various times. I came in early because I wanted to go home early and be with my kids. The senior partner, Partner S, he came in about 10 o'clock in the morning, and he'd stay until midnight at night. And, we just all worked various hours. Employees were there typically from 8 to 5. And everything was just humming along. And we were into late January, maybe early February, I don't remember. And one day, the phone rang, and it was a client calling. And it was a client of Partner M. Now remember, Partner M was the one that spearheaded the formation and the drafting and the conclusion of the partnership contract. Client called one day, who was a client of Partner M. Partner M had a tendency to come in earlier in the morning, go into his corner office and shut the door. And we didn't see too much of him. He was kind of a quiet guy, kind of an introvert, as most CPAs are. Sorry, this does get really interesting. I could write a book. Would have everything in it but murder, but as the story goes on, that could have happened also at one point. So anyway, Partner M would come in, shut his door, and then, maybe early afternoon, he'd have some place to go, some client to see or whatever, and he'd be gone. Nobody paid too much attention until this phone call came in that day, and they asked for Partner M, and Partner M was out. So they asked for the other accountant, the junior accountant working on the account. They had a question. And that accountant went to look in the filing system to pull out the file and answer the question, and couldn't find the file. Which wasn't unusual, because we all had a lot of files in our office that we were working on. So she went to Partner S and said, Partner M is gone, but his door is shut. Can I go in there and look for this file? And he said, sure, go look for it, because this client needed an answer to a question. So she went into the office and pulled. Desk didn't have the file on it, had some files on it, didn't have that particular one. Opened up the credenza, and the credenza was completely empty. Not a thing in it. There was some file cabinet sitting there. Opened up all the file cabinet drawers. Not a thing in it. Opened up all the drawers to the desk. Guess what? Not a thing in it. Some pencils, some pens. Nothing. So she went back to the senior partner and said, something's vastly wrong. There's nothing in his office. So at this point, we all kind of got involved and started looking in the filing cabinet for all of Partner M's client files. Guess what? There weren't any. They weren't there. The next morning, Partner S was there early when Partner M came in and said, we need to talk. And what he discovered in that talk was that Partner M had already taken his files to a different CPA firm, and when confronted, handed the copy of the buy-sell agreement over and said, I want to exercise this now. Less than 2 months into this agreement. To say that we were all stunned and angry and immediately in financial distress is an understatement. So I have a question for y'all. Did we at that point have a contract or a covenant? Come on, we've talked about the relationships. We had a contract. Contracts can bind two parties together that don't necessarily know each other or trust each other necessarily. Contracts are entered into all the time. Builders enter into contracts to build a home for someone that they don't know. There's lots of contracts that are enacted every single day without relationships. Covenants have a relationship. So I asked you, did we have a covenant or a contract? At the point we signed that partnership agreement, there was trust. There was promise of a financial future. There was a personal relationship. But the minute this event happened, that relationship aspect vanished like a vapor. Trust me. And when I say I could write a book and there potentially was murder, partner S said that if he ever saw partner M crossing the street and he was in his car and he had the chance to hit the gas pedal, he would. And we all agreed at that point that that might be appropriate, sadly. Okay, so God enters into a covenant relationship with Moses. And let's look at this relational and arrangement aspect. And Jim, would you read for us Genesis 6:18 through 21?
Okay, I'm reading from the ESV.
Okay.
But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark, to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Of the birds according to their kinds, and of the animals according to their kinds, of every creeping thing of the ground according to its kind. 2 of every sort shall come into you to keep them alive. Also take with you every sort of food that is eaten, and store it up. It shall serve as food for you and for them. Through 21?
Through 21?
Yeah.
Okay, and now turn back to Genesis 6, 9, and 10, and hold that real quick. 9 and 10, just hold it for a second. So here we have God saying, I'm going to enter into a covenant with you, and what were the arrangements that God was asking Noah to do? Build an ark, right? What else? You people are really quiet today. I need chatter out there. What was another thing God asked Noah to do? Take his family into the ark, gather the animals, and there was one more thing there. Food. Okay, so those were the arrangements that God asked Noah to do. Now, where's the relationship in all of this? I had to look back to Genesis 6, 9, and 10 because it wasn't in the lesson study. Jim, would you read that for us, please?
Okay, Genesis 6, 9, and 10. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. And Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
Okay, so there's the relationship. Noah was a righteous man. He believed in God. He trusted in God. So what was God's arrangement in this particular covenant? It was very simple. God had one arrangement. Salvation from the flood. He saved them from the flood. So see, here's the 2 elements, and this fits into that broad umbrella of what God's arrangements are in all of his covenants, and that is salvation. Okay. Yes.
It was salvation that God provided right there. But going back to before sin with Adam and Eve, it's very interesting because they already had a covenant right there because God provided the tree of life for them to perpetuate their existence. And at the same time, they had to obey and not to eat from the forbidden tree. So there was a covenant right there even before. But now, after sin, things changed. And we see some adjustments there, but it's also a covenant. God provides, and God helps us to keep that covenant. So he provides everything. It's very, very interesting.
And all man really has to do is obey, right? Right. And that's what Noah did here. He obeyed. Okay, so covenants as well as contracts typically are loaded with commitments. And what happens when a contract is violated? What happens when a provision in the contract or the contract is broken? What happens? I'll tell you what happens first, and then Bill, I'll get your comment, and Jim. The first thing that happens when a contract is broken is lawyers make a lot of money. And trust me, Our lawyers made a lot of money back in 1986. Bill, you have a comment? Jim, you want to comment first quick? And then
I was just going to say, similar to what our brother here. So you look through the Bible and you see the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. There's two choices. In Noah's day, you could stay on the land or you could get in the ark.
right.
Two choices. The
Oh.
ark was like the tree of life, and it provided so the promise of the seed came through Noah and his descendants. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here today.
That's right. That's exactly right. Okay, and I think I had asked the question, what happens when a contract or a covenant is broken? Bill, you had a thought on that.
In one word, consequences.
Consequences,
There are
yes.
consequences.
Oh, that reminds me of a story. We were in Florida with our grandson, and I didn't use that word. I said for every action there is a reaction, and that's really what you're saying. There are consequences. Jackson and Olin were goofing around. We were on this deck, and we had walked over to this deck to look into an alligator pond, see if we could see any alligators. And the two boys, and I mean it was a 30-foot drop off into this alligator pond from this deck. And the boys were goofing around, and in the goofing around, one slapped the other one, and the other one whirled around and bumped into him and knocked his phone loose. And the phone slid across this desk and stopped about that far from going woo into the alligator pond. And we all just, because there wasn't any of us that could have gotten to it fast enough, and if it when it went in there, it would have been in there forever. And I said right then, I says, this teaches you guys a lesson. For every action, there is a reaction, and sometimes the reaction isn't good. The consequences are not good, and that's what happens when a covenant is broken. So when you think of Noah and the covenant that God made, what would have happened if Noah would have said, that's a big boat you're asking me to build. I'm an old guy. I love you, but I don't think I can do that. Or what if God would have said, you build the boat, Noah, and you gather the animals and the food and your family, but I really haven't made up my mind yet whether or not I'm going to save you. I may just put an end to this whole and entire creating man in my image. It's just egregious, and I don't know for sure. What would have happened? We wouldn't be here. Would have been the end. But what did happen? Noah was faithful, and Noah was obedient. God was faithful, and God fulfilled his covenant promise. And there are many instances as we go through these where God proves his faithfulness. God proves that he can be trusted, unlike partner M. Bill?
I think there is a distinctive here in that in every instance when we read of God's covenant, he takes the initiative.
He does take the initiative, yes, absolutely.
And I think too, Dan, and I don't want to drift too far from your conversation here, but I think that in the 21st century, those of us who claim to be believers need to ask this question of ourselves. Do we have a contract with the Almighty, or do we have a covenant? And there's a great difference.
There's a great difference.
Great difference.
And we could end the lesson study right there, because that is the key question. That is the key question. Thank you, Bill. So let's move on. The next part of the lesson study talks about God's covenant with Abram. And there is definitely a relationship here between God and Abram and God. This particular covenant is even a little more extensive than the one with Noah. A few more paragraphs, a few more provisions, if you will. So what are some of the arrangements that God said he would do for Abram? And there's a lot of them. So everybody jump up quick and tell me what they are. God said to Abram, I will do what for you? I will bless you. I will multiply you. I will make your descendants like the stars of the heavens. I will bless all nations through you. I mean, wow, lots of things. What was Abraham's arrangement? What did Abraham have to do?
To leave his own city, and Mesopotamia was full of sin and idolatry, and he needed to obey and have faith. And it's very similar to the Christian experience. We must abandon sin, idolatry, and follow God. So basically, that's what Abraham needed to do, to leave that place and go to the place where God wanted him to be.
That's exactly right. And that was really the only arrangement at that time that God asked of Abraham. Leave the land of Ur and go over there. And again, do we see... Now, and let's think about this relationship again. This is a very unique relationship. Abram loved God and honored God and obeyed God. And obviously God loved Abram. Okay? So anything else that God promised? How about the promised land? How about the land of Canaan, the land flowing with milk and honey? How about if you read further into this whole covenant, God also said, even back then, at some point your descendants are all going to be in slavery, and I'm going to pull you out of slavery, and I'm going to benefit you, and you're just going to be this fantastic nation. And again, in all of these arrangements that God said he was going to do, what was man's role? First of all, Abram had to leave, and go away from the environment that he was in, leave his family, etc., his ancestors. But what really, when you look at all of this down through the ages, really what was in this particular covenant with Abraham, what was the role of Abraham's descendants? Obedience, right? It was obedience. Bill, did you have another thought?
One of the key verses from this week's study is taken from Galatians, the 3rd chapter and the 29th verse. I love this because I think it actually gives us a concise definition of our relationship with Christ, and it provides for us a concise definition of what the covenant is all about. Galatians 3:29. And now that you belong to Christ, you are the true children of Abraham. You are his heirs, and God's promise to Abraham belongs to you.
Yeah. Yep. Another comment?
So you said the man's role was obedience, but I think obedience is really tied in more with the contract. Whereas God wants our heart. And so a person can not kill somebody, but it doesn't mean they love their brother. He wants us to go beyond obedience. I see obedience as really just the basic, lowest. He wants so much more than that. He wants us to be like him. He wants us to be not thinking about money, but thinking about the long term, not the short term.
I agree, 100%. And all of these comments are wonderful, and we could end the lesson study here because you've just all taken my final parting words. But that's great. That is exactly right. Oh, and we're gonna. This lesson struck me when I first read through it. There was some elements in it that I thought this is going to be interesting. I have a client who is Jewish by descendant, not by religion. He is a Christian. And he and I have talked about religion, organized religion, a little bit. And he made the comment one day that you Adventists are too hung up on works. And I didn't argue. And I want to address this element of obedience, this concept of obedience, and how we view obedience and how we view works. Because I believe in works. I do. And this whole lesson study pulls that out. There's first salvation by faith, and then there's works through obedience. But we'll get to that. We'll talk about that in the end. Yes?
Talking about the relationship with this covenant with Abraham, it's so amazing because even God calls him Abraham, my friend.
Yes.
You know, that relationship right there, he was not trying to gain salvation. He loved God. Everywhere he moved, the first thing he was doing is setting up a place of worship. And everywhere he went, people knew that he served the Lord. And people were impressed with the life that Abraham lived because he loved God.
Right. And I think, at least in the Message Bible, it refers to that close relationship, that friend relationship, as blood brothers. I don't know if it does in some of the other paraphrases or translations. But yes, that's exactly right. Jim?
You mentioned your friend of a Jewish background who was concerned that we spend too much time on works.
Mm-hmm.
Well, our church has published a little book called Faith and Works, and I've read it, I think, at least twice, because it's a topic I'm very interested in, and there's a short statement that might help him. There is not a point that needs to be dwelt upon more earnestly, repeated more frequently, or established more firmly in the minds of all than the impossibility of fallen man meriting anything by his own best good works. Salvation is through faith in Jesus Christ alone.
Right.
So, and I want to say one more thing. You can read the rest of the book, and it makes clear that works are the fruit that demonstrate.
Right.
But we somehow as humans need to have this repeated, utterly impossible to merit anything. And
Right.
I was thinking in terms of Abraham. God promised him the impossible. I will make of you a great nation. He had no kids.
Right.
He had no prospect of
Right.
kids. God said, I'll do the impossible for you.
Right.
And that's what God promises to do for us.
Right. Excellent. And hopefully remind me to help tie that all together in the end here. I would like to just read something real quick about this covenant with Abraham out of the lesson study. I thought it was so good. And this ties right in with what you're saying. In addition, Abraham received a single but testing command. Go forth. That was what he was supposed to do. Just go. That was his arrangement in the covenant. Go. He obeyed by faith, but not in order to bring about the promised blessings. His obedience was the response of his faith to the loving relationship which God already had established. In other words, Abram already believed in God, already trusted in God, already had faith in God's promises. There's that trust and faith, Bill. He had to, otherwise he never would have left his family and ancestral land to begin with and headed into places unknown. His obedience revealed his faith both to men and to angels. Abraham, even back then, revealed the key relationship in works of obedience. And here it is, Jim. This is exactly what you said. The promise of salvation comes first. God comes to us in this covenant first with the promise of salvation. The works follow. And there's many things here that we can discuss. Although there can be no covenant fellowship and no blessing without obedience, that obedience in faith is faith's response to what God has already done. Such faith illustrates the principle of 1 John 4:19. We love him because he first loved us. And there's more depth to be mined from there. Yes?
If you ever watched a small child who has a hero, he wants to dress like that hero, he moves like that hero, he wants to eat the same things as that hero is eating. Is God our hero?
I would hope. And that's a very good point. And when the child has a hero and does all of those things, does he consider it works? Does he consider it a burden? No.
I think we're looking at the word obedience in human terms. And in human terms, it's like I tell you to, and then you do what I say. And I think God's covenant with us is a relationship. And I guess the closest human relationship that we could relate to is a marriage. And when a married couple, there is a covenant of faithfulness, and part of that is relationship and understanding. And it's not obeying in the sense of I told you to and then you must. And so I think that we're looking at it a little differently, probably what the original words mean. I was looking up the original word for obedience in Greek, and I am not a theologian by any means, but it says to listen under, and it goes on to say that it can be an outward expression, but one thing it says is an outward expression of a heart, which I think is very different than a command and a response.
I agree. Thank you. Yeah. And we're getting right down to the heart of the lesson. Two hearts of the lesson. Let's go on and talk about the covenant with Moses. Would someone please read, Bill, would you mind reading Exodus 6, 1 through 8 to us? And tell us the version of the Bible you're reading from.
Then the Lord said to Moses, "Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of his country." God also said to Moses, "I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty. But by my name, the Lord, I did not make myself fully known to them. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, where they resided as foreigners. Moreover, I have heard the groaning of the Israelites, whom the Egyptians are enslaving, and I have remembered my covenant. Therefore I say to the Israelites, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God, who brought you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. And I will bring you to the land I swore with uplifted hand to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to you as a possession. I am the Lord.
Thank you. That's a beautiful passage. I love it. So what were God's arrangements in this covenant? He was going to do two things: bring them out of slavery and give them the promised land, right? Those were God's arrangements. Those are pretty big deals. And at that point, let's talk about the relationship in this covenant. What kind of a relationship did the Israelites at that point in time, 400 years of slavery in Egypt, what kind of relationship did they have with God? Pretty shallow, right? Would be my guess. Some may be better than others, I don't know. But by and large, and as they as they left Egypt and got out into the wilderness and almost got into Canaan and then had to spend 40 more years, that relationship was developing and it was building. And at first, Vicki and I are just reading through the book of Exodus right now, as well as the children Bible stories from 1952 or whatever by John Maxwell. Pretty fascinating. These people didn't have a really strong relationship. They didn't have much faith. And what was God trying to do for them? He was trying to establish that relationship. Trust me. See what I can do for you. I mean, look at what he did to bring them out of Egypt. All the things that he did with Pharaoh and the plagues. And then they get out there and, their backs are up against the wall at the Red Sea. And what did he do? Parted the waters. And then they get out there and they don't have any food or water. And what did he do? He provided it. Building this relationship. So God was really working on this relationship. And again, all he was asking of the Israelites at that time was just trust me, have faith in me. And when they got right to the edge and they sent 12 guys in, and 10 came back and said, we can't do this. They're too big, they're too mean, we can't do this. And 2 said, oh yeah, we can. And the people voted with the 10. And it took 40 more years to build that relationship. And really, all God was asking is just trust me. And in that trust is, as I'm leading you through this, kind of obey me. And I'll use that term like we think of today. I've asked you to do some things. He gave them this covenant, this law of love at Sinai. He said, just do these things. Just do them. They're for your own good. I think the thing that strikes me most about this, I'll hold my thought. Go ahead.
Did you catch, I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty. But by my name, the Lord, I did not make myself fully known to them. And I think if we look at the struggle side of Noah, Abram, Moses, they all demonstrate doubt. There is so much about God that they did not know. And we see the glory looking back, but there were guts that are practically unfathomable from a human perspective of what they actually did.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And that segues really well into what I was going to say. What strikes me in all of this, in all of these covenants, in this covenant primer in this lesson this week, is God's amazing grace. That's really, to me, one of the two hearts of this whole lesson is God's amazing grace, because time and time again, he came back. He came to man, said, here I am. I'm faithful. I'm trustworthy. By what happened, but I've just got this amazing and endless amount of grace for you, and I'm going to keep at this till we get it right. Okay. So what eventually happened to our partnership? Partner M got paid a huge down payment and we were obligated to pay a fairly hefty sum every month for the next 5 years. The partnership's cash flow sucked like a Hoover vacuum cleaner. Every dime that came in went right into Im's pocket, and he was off practicing accounting with somebody else. The partnership defaulted on the lease. We defaulted on a loan with the bank. We considered bankruptcy. But even back then, and this was a time in my life when, if there was ever a time when I should have listened to God's directive to be not unequally yoked, this would have been it. But I had strayed. My relationship with God at the time was not good. There's a whole backstory to that and reasons, not that they're justifications, but there are reasons why I had walked away from a strong relationship with God at the time. But in looking back now, here we are all the way. That happened in 1986. Here we are down in 2021, a long time ago, but it's still in my brain like it was yesterday. I can see God working in my life even then, when I had strayed, because we were able to sell the practice to another CPA firm, who then paid off the bank. And over time, we collected enough on our accounts receivable to make a credible offer to the owners of the Fernwell building to pay off the lease at a muchly discounted rate, and they accepted it. Partner S, the senior partner, he moved to the west side and was gone out of our lives. Ultimately, and I don't say this with any amount of glee or joy, but partner M was ultimately terminated from the new partnership that he had gone into secretly. And he moved out of town to find employment. In my practice, I'm still practicing. 2022. God's amazing grace is all I can say. God's amazing grace. So, going back to where I started with this whole thing, what was missing? What was missing in our contract? There were two things. Did you have a comment that you wanted to say? I'm sorry.
Well, I'm a little behind on the shot here, but I was thinking in Jeremiah 44, 46, around there somewhere, where Israel had been taken by Nebuchadnezzar, and some of them went down to Egypt again, back to the former land of slavery, rather than acknowledging where they had failed. And I just thought of, at any point, whether we are going back to slavery, to something, wherever our life is, God always comes to us afresh and says, I will do the impossible for you if you'll let me do the impossible in you. And that's a cool invitation. Just let me come in, and I'll take care of what's outside.
Yeah, excellent. And that's, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so thank you. Appreciate that. Back to our partnership. What was missing? What was missing in it ultimately that made it a contract and not a covenant? Relationship. A relationship based on trust, on faith. Yeah, it was gone. It really wasn't there. Some of us thought it was, and it wasn't. Okay, but there was another really key element that all of us discovered when the lawyers were making a lot of money and we were reviewing this whole thing. There was something that we also noticed in that thing. And remember what a covenant has? It has two elements: relational arrangements. The one thing that our partnership agreement didn't have were performance requirements. And so when partner M wasn't performing, there wasn't anything in there that held him accountable to that. So it was missing two things: relation and arrangements. And trust me, when you don't have those in a covenant, you don't have a covenant. You don't have much of a contract either, for all that matter. Another comment.
So one other thing that your contract did not have is partner M didn't have any buy-in. So he got a lot of assets, a lot of value with no buy-in. And so that was an incentive for him, not knowing his intentions. But with God, we know that he's incapable of sinning. He's always honest, and he's always thinking about our salvation, not just the temporary short-term thing like we tend to do with contracts.
Very good. Yes, I agree. Thank you. So let's talk about the other key thing here that I think is the heart of this lesson, and that is getting back to this obedience. And I don't want to belabor this, but a lot of us in this room may have been raised in a time in Adventism when there was a lot of emphasis on the do's and don'ts without the emphasis on the relationship. Okay? And it's taken me a long time in my adulthood to twist my thinking around and saying, do I obey because I was taught to do that, and it was just something that we did. I didn't go to movies. I didn't play cards. I didn't go to school dances. I didn't do this because that was the expected obedience. That was the rule of the land at the time. Did I do that because of a relationship or because of an obligation? And I really want to point out that when we obey in today's vernacular, today's modern 21st century obedience, when we obey out of obligation, I believe it is works. I believe it is works. And works don't save us. Okay? Never will. However, if we obey out of relational love, it's not works at all. I don't view it as that. I view it as a marriage, like Sarah pointed out. A lot of things Vicki and I do for each other that others might say, oh, that's a lot of work. It's not. It's obedience out of love. It's not an obligation. It's obedience out of love. And it changes everything. It's not works. Yes?
I want to share a little story that goes with what you're saying. When I was, must have been around about 7th grade or 5th grade, around there, I had my best friend. He would come to my house. We lived in a little farm, and there were a lot of things to do around the farm, as usual. And he was always help my mom with gladness in his heart. I'm not exaggerating, he was so happy to help my mom. Things that I would hate to do, he was enjoying doing those things. So I grew up with that impression, that concept, but I never said anything to him. But for me, my best friend was like, wow, he is the best. And I grew up with that, and some years ago, all grown-ups, I had a chance to talk to him on the phone, and I said, Martin, that's his name, Martin, I just want to tell you something that I never did. How much I appreciate it, and that concept that I have, that you always help my mom with gladness. And I couldn't explain why. And then he says, I was in love with your sister. And I'm like, oh, okay, that explains it. So, that goes with that relationship.
Sure,
sure. We don't obey God just because of the fear of death. Right. But when love is involved, you will do things that we usually don't like to do. We'll
Absolutely.
do them with gladness.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's a beautiful ending to this lesson study. I agree. And all I want to say is one more thing. God comes to us first. God comes to us first. That's the order of the covenant. God comes to us first. And we didn't even get into the new covenant. I'm sorry about that, because that's a wonderful thing too. God comes to us first, and our God is a God of absolute faithfulness and amazing grace. Thank you. Let's pray. Father, thank you for coming to us first. Thank you for your amazing grace, Lord. And it is my heart's desire today to, whatever I do in the next hours, days, weeks, months, out of love, not obligation, out of love. Lord, help me to build that relationship with you. You've already built it with me. Thank you. Amen. Thank you all. Next time I teach, you're going to have to talk more, or I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm kidding. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, everyone who made comments today.